So this is the Toshiba Z670 Fire TV. This is their 65-inch. So the first TV that I ever bought many years ago with my own money was a Toshiba Regza. It was a 42-inch TV, and at that time it was a flat screen TV. It was huge. Obviously it wasn't a 65-inch, but back then 42-inch TVs were, you know, I thought I had made it. And I actually didn't realize in 2026 that Toshiba was still making TVs, but they are. So this is the 65-inch. So we're going to review it. We're going to check it out. But what I'm using for HDMI cables is Ruipro. So if you've never heard of Ruipro makes these really nice fiber optic HDMI cables. So these aren't your typical HDMI cables. These do like up to 8K, you know, full bandwidth because it's optical, you know, so, or fiber optic, I'm sorry. So it's using light. But what I love about these cables is how thin the cable is. Because it's fiber optic, you don't need a big, bulky, thick HDMI cable, which helps out a lot of people, because if you're trying to fish this through a wall or a ceiling like I have here in my living room, it's super flexible. You can bend it. You don't have to worry about it getting tangled, or if the cable's too thick, it's not going to go through the wall. But the beauty of these cables is they have detachable heads. So I have a couple of heads here. So I have an HDMI, and on one end it's going to say display, and on the other end it's going to say, you know, you're going to hook it up to your Xbox or your source, basically. But what's cool about these is you can interchange these. So I have an HDMI here, which I'm going to be using, and I have that here. I'm running this all the way from my home theater. This is a 50-foot cable. So another thing about fiber optics is you can do extremely long runs versus HDMI. Once you get over certain feet, you degrade your quality. But with fiber optics, you don't have that issue. So this is a 50-foot. I'm running from my Kaleidoscape. I'll be hooking this up to my TV, and on one end you have a USB type A. So that's the only thing. You will have to connect this to power. Most TVs have an HDMI port on the back of the TV. All you do is just plug that in, your HDMI, and then you only need one end that has USB for power, and you're good. But I'm also using this for Ethernet. So here I have an Ethernet head, and I can connect this to the Ethernet, plug this up to my TV, plug the other side or the other end into my network switch, and you still will need the USB type A on one end. So again, that's the only thing. That's probably the only downside, but so many benefits with this. You know, it does up to 8K, auto low latency mode. Like, you don't have any restrictions with fiber optics. So with Ruipro, you can also mix and match. So here I have an 8K full fiber optic display port to HDMI. So if you're a gamer and maybe you have a computer and then you have a monitor, and maybe one of your monitors doesn't have an HDMI and it has display port, the cool thing about these is you can get these to where you can mix and match them. So maybe you need to plug HDMI into your computer, and then the other end goes into the display port on your monitor, and you're set. So let's get into reviewing this TV. So one thing about these modern TVs is, you know, when it goes into screensaver mode, you can have this image that looks like a picture hanging on your wall. So that's pretty cool. But let's check out the TV. So as I mentioned, this is a Fire TV, so you will get the benefits of something like, you know, Amazon Prime. And so unlike most TVs today that use Google Android TV, Toshiba is using Fire TV. So if you have like a Fire Stick, Amazon Fire Stick, this is the same operating system that's going to use. So it's pretty snappy, as you can see. You do have that little clicking sound, just like Fire TV, but you can see this is very, very snappy, very quick. Probably one of the quickest that I've seen. And then at this top row, you have all your apps. You know, you've got your Netflix, Prime, YouTube. So again, if you're using this, if you have a Fire TV, Fire Stick, it's going to look exactly the same. It's going to function exactly the same. So this is what your menu is going to look like. Now, this is completely different. I'm going to have to get used to this because, like I said, most of the TVs that I have, at least all of the TVs that I have in my home are Hisense, and they use Android Google TV. But this is what the menu system looks like. So you've got your inputs, your network, device and software, account and profile settings, controllers and Bluetooth devices, display and sound, and then your others. So I'm assuming that if you have a Fire Stick, this is what the settings looks like. So this does support 4 HDMI ports, and then you have one that has eARC. And you also have composite. And this does have an antenna. So if you hook up, you know, your cable box, your cable, you have coaxial, it does have a coaxial that you can do that. So you have your sound settings, sound mode, you have standard, movie, music, sport, and custom. And then you can also connect this to your home kit, so you can control this. You know, if you have a smart home, you want to do automations, or if you want to AirPlay, if you're watching something on your iPad or your iPhone and you want to AirPlay it to the TV, you can do that. For audio output, you can turn your TV speakers to leave them on or off. You've got your audio output jack, ARC mode, digital audio format, and DTS DRC. So the UI is pretty simple. It's very clean. It's quick. There's not a whole lot to discuss here. I'm not gonna, you know, spend a lot of time talking about the user interface, but as I said, you can see it is super quick. This is one of the quickest that I've seen. And then if you want to watch all your apps, you know, your standard apps, then you can do that as well. So I want to check out the picture settings. So I'm going to hop over to the Kaleidoscape. Okay, so right now I have switched over to the Kaleidoscape, and as you can see, it looks beautiful. So let's check out the different video settings that we have here. So this is on standard right now. We've got movie, which is probably going to be one of the video profiles that most people use, but you've got movie, sport, game. Obviously we're not going to use that here, but if you have like a Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5 or a PC that you want to game, you want to get all the gaming features, you would use that here. And then filmmaker mode is what you're going to want to use if you're using this for movies. So what I typically like to do is I like to go into the settings and turn off all of the unnecessary stuff that usually is on here. But for filmmaker mode, everything should be disabled. So this is the standard filmmaker mode. You see the backlight is at 100%. Local dimming is at high. We can change that to high, medium, low, or off. I'm going to leave that on high. Peak brightness, you have high, medium, low, or off. Again, this is the filmmaker mode, so I'm probably not going to change too many settings here. You've got your advanced settings. So intelligent picture, you can do intelligent HDR. Obviously it's off because of filmmaker mode. Brightness, dynamic contrast, so yeah, all of these are going to be off. Motion, film processing, I'm probably going to turn that off. Okay, but you can see you've got custom, film, clear, standard, and smooth. And then for clarity, yeah, sharpness is off. Sharpness is one of the settings that I always turn off because it just adds a bunch of graininess, and because it's filmmaker mode, it usually disables everything. So it's good to see that that's off. Super resolution, I'm probably going to leave that on off. Okay. So this is your filmmaker mode here. If we go back into picture, if we switch over to, let's go over to vivid. Now you'll notice the lights on this ship just really popped. So let me go back to filmmaker mode. Now this looks more natural. So the light is not as bright, it's not as pronounced, but when we go back to vivid, you'll see it goes to a more like blue light, and then it's just, you know, super vivid. So some of you guys may like that, but yeah, you can see a big difference there. Again, there's filmmaker mode versus vivid. So let's go back to filmmaker mode, and then we'll go over to standard. So standard, it really darkens the picture. To me, that's too dark. You lose a lot of detail. You can see what happens in the lights. So if we go back to filmmaker mode, the lights get more pronounced, more natural, but then standard, you see it just darkens everything, and that's just way too dark. Obviously you can go in and customize the settings how you want it, calibrate it, but that's just how it looks in comparison to filmmaker mode. So if we go back to filmmaker mode, and then we go over to movie, I don't really see any change. The only thing that really changed is the lights. You can see the lights are a little bit dimmer on filmmaker mode, but when we go over to movie, the lights get a little bit brighter. I do see a little bit more detail in the lights, so it looks like there's some haze or some type of clouds or something right below the lights that you can see. There's more detail there versus filmmaker mode. So it does enhance, you know, the highlights a little bit. So that does make it pop a little bit. So if you want to keep it on movie, looks like it's pretty much the same as filmmaker mode, at least, you know, on the still. You might get a little bit more, you know, dynamic range on movie versus filmmaker mode. And then obviously most people are probably not going to go to sport, but let's look and see what it looks like. So it darkens the background, you lose some specular highlights, and then it over sharpens or over brightens the lights in comparison to filmmaker mode. So again, that's filmmaker mode, and then that's sport, and then it adds that blue light again back into those headlights, which is not natural. That's not how it's supposed to look. Okay, so now I've hopped over to the movie alpha on the Kaleidoscope. So I believe this movie was mastered at something like 10,000 nits or 1,000 nits, one of those, maybe 1,000 nits. So this is usually a very difficult movie and scene for displays to handle with HDR. So I want to see how this looks. So notice the detail in the clouds, notice the sun, and on a very good display, you can see different gradations on the sun. It's not like overly blatantly apparent, but on display, if you pay attention, you can see how the sun and its rays, it's radiant, and there's different gradual steps in the light as it, you know, expands over the horizon. So again, let's go into the picture settings, and this is actually very impressive to me on this filmmaker mode here. So you've got your filmmaker mode. Let's go over to vivid. Now, as you can see, that is just way oversaturated, just kind of almost blown out a little bit, just super oversaturated. That doesn't look good. I mean, you can see the sun actually starts to bleed over into, you know, the characters on his fur, on his jacket, and that's just not how that's supposed to look. Doesn't look natural at all. The clouds, they're oversaturated. You lose some detail in the background. Not how that is supposed to look at all. So again, if that's something that you want to use, I don't know how many people actually use vivid, but you know, you can always calibrate that. So we have vivid. Go back to filmmaker mode. So look at the difference between how the sun looks in filmmaker versus vivid. Just completely oversaturated. Look at their faces. Just completely unnatural on vivid. So if we hop over to standard, That looks a little bit better. Now the sun does get a little bit more vivid, but you may not be able to see it in the video, but you lose a lot of detail in the sun. So whereas in the filmmaker mode, you can see where the sun is, you know, you can see the outline of the sun on the horizon, whereas on standard, you don't get that. So you do get you know, a little bit more color and saturation, but you lose, you know, those fine details. So if we go over to filmmaker mode and go over to movie, I'm expecting this to not look very much different. I'm assuming the sun is probably going to get maybe a little bit brighter, but nothing else is going to change. So yeah, like I said, the sun gets brighter. Everything else looks exactly the same on filmmaker mode, but again, you do lose, like I can't even see the sun now. Whereas on filmmaker mode, you see the sun, you see exactly where it is. You can see, you know, you can see the outline of the sun still, and then you can see the rays as it radiates across the horizon. Whereas on the movie profile, it just, you lose the detail in the sun. You don't see the outline of the sun. I think this actually still looks really good, but you're losing that detail. So, you know, specular highlights, HDR, this is not really how it's supposed to look, but in comparison to something like, you know, vivid, it just, everything's blown out, everything's oversaturated, and it just doesn't look good at all. So I'd say filmmaker mode, yeah, so filmmaker mode is going to be your best bet. Movie mode, you can probably use this one if you calibrate it properly. And then if we go back to filmmaker mode and go over to sport, yeah, it's completely blown out. Doesn't look too bad. Again, I don't think I've ever used the sport profile on any TV. I don't really know what that's for. I'm assuming if you're watching sports like basketball, football, but even then, I usually typically just leave it on filmmaker mode. So this is another scene that I like to use from Alpha, this fire scene, because it really shows you how good your display is with HDR and black levels and contrast and specular highlights with the embers and the fire. So right now I'm on filmmaker mode, and you know, it looks natural. You've got the hue of the fire, you know, casting shadows on the actors' faces, casting that light from the fire on their faces. You've got a little bit of that haze from the smoke over there on the far right. So let's go over to vivid and see how this looks. And that looks absolutely horrible. So I don't know if you noticed it, but if we go back to filmmaker mode, look at the actor on the far right. It's almost like there's this like weird halo light that just glowing around him. Just looks absolutely completely unnatural. If you notice the fire down at the bottom, you know, it's oversaturated. I mean, this looks nasty. So don't use vivid. As you can see, that it's got that weird halo look on it. So let's go back to filmmaker mode, and then we'll go to standard. So again, standard, it does, now you'll notice that it had that weird halo look, but then it completely darkened the image. So that's just way too dark. You lose a lot of detail. The black levels, you know, don't look any good. The actors' faces lose that light from the fire, and the black levels actually look kind of gray now, you know, behind the actors. So standard doesn't look really good here either. Again, this is a really hard movie for a lot of TVs to reproduce accurately. So we'll go back over to filmmaker mode, and then let's go to movie. Again, I'm expecting probably not much to change except for that fire that down there at the bottom. Okay, so yeah, almost the same. Movie does introduce a little bit more light that kind of washes it out a little bit. So let's go back to filmmaker mode and then go back to movie. So it does introduce a slight halo, but again, it's pretty close to the filmmaker mode. So if you want to use movie, just make sure that you calibrate it properly. So then we'll go back to filmmaker mode, and then we'll go to sport. And again, you get this weird halo look. So sport, standard, as you can see, it just completely darkens the scene. And vivid, that just looks absolutely horrible. So movie is going to be your second best bet, and then filmmaker mode obviously is going to be the go-to for watching movies, especially something that if you're looking for accuracy with like HDR, specular highlights, you're going to want to use the filmmaker mode. Okay, so now we're in Disney Plus, and to show you the different formats that the TV supports, you've got Shang-Chi, so you've got IMAX Enhanced, you've got 4K, Dolby Vision, and Dolby Atmos. So I'm going to click continue on this, and you'll notice we get Dolby Vision. So right now I've switched over to Dolby Vision Standard, so that's Dolby Vision IQ. That looks to me a little bit more natural versus standard, Stark, Dolby Vision Vivid, Dolby Vision Dark, and then obviously you have sport in the game. We don't need those. But yeah, all the picture settings on Dolby Vision look pretty good. So that is the Toshiba Z670 65-inch. I'll leave links in the description if you want to pick this up. But I'm very impressed. It's been years since I have seen a Toshiba display, and since I've had one in my house. The interface is super snappy. Picture quality is great. Obviously, if you hook this up, you know, if this is going to be put in your living room or something like that, most people may have a sound bar or surround sound system. Maybe you're putting this in your home theater, but I'm absolutely impressed with Toshiba. Again, I'll leave links in the description if you want to check these out. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.